After learning all the different MongoDB commands, you're going to want to use MongoDB in an actual project setting. So that's what we're going to do in this screencast and the next one. In this screencast, we're going to use the PHP driver to build a really super simple PHP application. Now, of course, the first thing we need to do is install the PHP driver. This can be somewhat complicated depending on your development setup. And because it can be pretty complicated, I'm just going to talk about how you can do it here. And you can figure this out for your own setup. And then I'm going to use a virtual machine that you'll be able to download later. You'll find a link to it underneath this video. So let's begin by looking here at the MongoDB documentation for installing the PHP driver. There'll be a link to this page underneath this video as well. And so you can see from this that if we're installing this on Unix, and of course this would include Mac OS X, you need to use PECL, or PECL, which is the PHP Extension Community Library application. This can install different PHP libraries and extensions for you. It's similar to the Ruby gems in that way. As you can see here, if you have PECL all set up on your computer with your PHP installation, you can go ahead and run sudo PECL install Mongo, and that should work just fine. Unfortunately, PECL doesn't come installed and properly set up in the default installation of MAMP, and so you may have to Google around to figure out how to set that up. You may find it easier, though, to install PHP on your system yourself, or just to use a virtual machine like I'm going to do here. After you've installed the Mongo package, then you'll want to go ahead and add this line here to your php.ini file. And then, of course, you'll restart the server, and you should have Mongo working just fine. Now, if you're on Windows, they have great instructions for this right here. You just have to download the correct driver for your specific Windows version from this link right here, and then unzip and add the php_mongo.dll file to your PHP extensions directory, and then add this line right here to your php.ini file, and again restart the web server, and you should be just fine. Now, the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to use a virtual machine via Vagrant. If you haven't heard of Vagrant, it's just a command line tool that makes working with virtual machines much, much simpler. There'll be a link to a NetTuts tutorial on Vagrant underneath this screencast. So you can see right here, I've got mongo.box. This is the file you can download from a link underneath this video. And this mongo.box file is a base box for a Vagrant virtual machine. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my terminal here. I'll move to the desktop. Right now, if I run the command vagrant box list, you can see that I have no boxes installed. So I'm going to do vagrant box add, and then I'll just use mongo.box there. Now, you could just paste the link that I'm going to give you, which is just going to be an Amazon S3 link to this box. You could paste that link right in there. You don't have to download it first. And, oh, that's right. I need to add a name for it first. So I will call it Mongo. Actually, let me call it Mongo Server. So now that's going to just copy this into our Vagrant files, and now we'll be able to use this box after this copying takes place. So now that we've added the box to Vagrant, I'm going to create a new directory here, and we're just going to call this mongo-php, and then let me cd into this mongo-php directory. And in here, we want to run vagrant init, and we called our box Mongo Server. So I have to say we want to init a new virtual machine based on the Mongo Server box. So then I want to open up this Vagrant file, which is a Ruby file, and right here, I want to uncomment this line that allows us to configure port forwarding. What this will do is allow us to access the server from our own browser here, so that when we go to localhost 8080 in our browser, it will be running from the server that is in this virtual machine. And I'm actually going to change this from 8080 to 1234. The port number doesn't really matter. I just don't want it to conflict with some other things I have set up on my computer here. So now that we've made that change, I can go ahead and run vagrant up, and this is going to start up our virtual machine. Okay, so now that our virtual machine is running, we do need to do a last bit of configuration to it. So I'm going to run vagrant SSH to SSH into this virtual machine. And what we need to do is point the Apache server to the right directory. I'm going to sudo vim /etc/apache2/sites that are available, and we want to change the default site. And as you can see here, this is actually already changed on this virtual machine, but you might need to change it yourself. The document root here is Vagrant, and the directory is Vagrant as well. So you'll want to make sure that is set. So now when I open up our browser and I go to localhost port 1234, you can see that what we're serving here is the directory that is our project directory, the directory that we created that Vagrant file in. So now I can exit SSH here, And now just from within this mongo-php file here on our desktop, let me go ahead and open an index.php file, and I can just create a basic PHP file here that just shows the PHP info. And now if I refresh this page, and you can see here, if I search for Mongo on this page, you can see that we don't have the Mongo extension installed yet. So if I come back here to the terminal, let me go ahead and save and close this, and I will run vagrant SSH to get back into our server. Install Mongo. And that may take a minute, but now you can see we've got this completed. So we've installed the extension. Now I'm going to copy this line right here, extension equals mongo.so. I will copy that, and then I want to edit the config file, which is at etsy/php5/apache2/php.ini. I'll just paste this in right at the bottom here. I'll save and close that. And then to restart the server, I'll just run vagrant halt, double and vagrant up, so that it will shut it down and then start it back up. And now that the server started back up, if we come back to localhost port 1234, and if we refresh the page, and now on the page, if I search for Mongo, you can see that we do have MongoDB support on our server now. Okay, so now that we have MongoDB support, let's actually start using the MongoDB driver. Let's go ahead and open that index.php file up again. And we want to start by creating a Mongo instance. So I'm just going to call it M, and this is going to be a new Mongo. And note that I do have MongoDB installed on our virtual machine, and it is running. So this will connect to the running instance on that virtual machine. Then I can create our database by saying Mongo, and then we just give it the name to the database. So in this case, we will just call the database Learning Mongo. And then we can connect to a collection just by we'll call the collection people, and we can say DB, and then we have the collection name. So in this case, that will be people. So just like in the Mongo JavaScript console, we don't need to create things first. We can just reference them, and MongoDB will create them as necessary. Okay, so now that we have this, let me close out our PHP tags here. And down below, we want to create a form where we can create a person. So we're going to have a form. The method that we will use here is post. We'll be posting, and I won't have an action because we're going to post to this page. And we want to have a paragraph, and inside this paragraph, we will have the person's name first. And so we can have an input of type text. The name, of course, will be name. Then I'll just duplicate this line and change the two instances of name to job. And then finally down here, we'll add one more paragraph. And in this, we can just put a button. And this will just be add. Okay, so that's all the text we need for our form. Now let's come back up here. And what we want to say is if the variable underscore post square bracket name is set. And what this tells us is if our form has been posted. So if our form has been posted, well, then we want to save the new user, the new person that we just gave the name and job for. We want to save it to our database. And so this will be just like on the console. We'll say people insert, and what we pass to insert here is an associative array. So very much like a hash in JavaScript. And in here, we will just set the name of our person, and we will set that equal to underscore post square brackets name. Then we will set the job of our person equal to the job field. And there we go. That's inserting the person into the database. However, we also want to have a list of all the people we've previously created underneath this form. So down here, we are going to create a cursor. And a cursor is just what we will have returned when we do a query to the database. And for our use here, a cursor is going to be pretty much just like an array of users returned from the database. But when you get into more complex cases where you want to do bigger things, or you have, say, hundreds of documents that you're returning from a database, a cursor can do some fancier things to help with memory management and that kind of thing. In this case, we just want to say people find, and we will pass find no parameters so that we will have everything found, all the people in the people's collection. Now, underneath this form, let's add another PHP tag here, and we want to say if cursor, and we will call the count method on the cursor object, and if the number of items in the cursor is greater than 0, then we're going to do one thing. Otherwise, else, if it is not, then we're just going to have a paragraph here that says no people. And then, of course, down at the bottom here, we'll go ahead and say end if. But if there are people, we want to create an unordered list. And this will be an unordered list of the people that we have. So in here, we're going to use a for each loop. So we'll say PHP for each, and we're going to say for each in the cursor as a document. And in here, of course, we're going to have a list item. And there'll be a couple of things inside this list item. First thing we want to have is an H2 element. This H2 element is just going to have the person's name. So we use square brackets syntax to get the person's name from a document. And then underneath this, we want to have two links. So I'll put both these links in a paragraph. And one link is going to be to update the values of this document, and the other will be to delete the document. So the updating will be at update.php !id equals, and then in here, we're actually going to put the ID for this element. And we can get the ID by just saying doc, and then underscore ID is, of course, the field name for the document there. And here, instead of just saying doc, I'm sorry, I should be saying echo. We want to echo the name, of course, as well. This will have the text update, and then I'm just going to yank and paste this down below, and we will have the delete.php file, and this is going to be delete. So these two files we will create shortly. So now this should work just fine in our browser. So let's go ahead and head back to Chrome here and go back to localhost port 1234. And as you can see, our form is showing up just fine. And because we haven't created anybody yet, we have no people showing up underneath. So let me go ahead and create one. We'll start by creating John Doe, and we'll give him the job of developer. If I click add, you can see that he shows up down below. And based on that update and delete text, it looks like I missed my closing tag for my H2. Yes, I did. And now if I reload the page, okay, that's a bit better. So we have update and delete. Let's add another one here. We can have Jane Smith, and let's just make her a designer. Now we actually aren't showing the job anywhere. So let's go ahead and put that in the H2 here. Just after the name, we'll put the job in parentheses. So we can echo doc, and we will put their job. There we go. So now if we refresh the page, now we have their job showing up in parentheses afterward. Let's do one more. We can have Bob White, and we'll give him the job of project manager. And now you can see there's our three values there. Okay, excellent. So now we're ready to go ahead and create these update and delete values. So let's do update first. So I'm going to create an update.php file. And this is going to start off the very same way our index.php file did. We want these same three lines. So I'm going to yank these three lines, and I'm actually going to create a new file called mongo.php. And in this file, I'll go ahead and paste those lines. And so now in here, we can just say include mongo.php. And I can replace these three lines here with include mongo.php as well. So that will just save us a little bit of typing. Okay, so inside of update here, let me go ahead and copy this form because it's going to be very similar. I'll yank this form and I'll paste it down below here. The main difference here is that we want to have a hidden field. And I'm using this hidden field just to make things a little bit easier in the way this will work. This hidden field will have a name of ID, and the value for it is going to be the document ID. But first we need to figure out what document we're talking about. So there are a couple of different options here. By default, you'll see here when we called this link, we used a query parameter here by having a question mark and then saying the ID equals this ID there. And if we come back to our things here, you can see if you look down at the bottom down here as I hover over these different things, you can see how that long object ID string shows up. Now, of course, you know that the object ID stored in the actual MongoDB database is not a string, and we're going to have to remember that when we are converting this back to pull the right record out. However, it does show up as a string here, and that will be just fine. So since we're using a query parameter here, this is going to be a get parameter. So to find if that has been set, we can say if is set $_get, and we want to see if the ID field has been set. So if the ID field has been set, then we know that this file has been loaded for updating. However, this form that we have down here is going to post to this same page. So since it's going to post to the same page, it's also possible to have a post request to this page that is meant to actually perform the update and not give us the opportunity to do the update. So in here, we want to say else if is set, and we want to look for _post, and we want to we'll just use the name field again to check to see if we are posting. So what do we want to do if we have a get here? Well, if we want to do a get, let's set person equal to, we're going to call people, which remember is a variable that we're going to get from this mongo.php file here. And we're going to call people.find1. And we have to pass this another associative array. And we want to find where that ID is equal to. And remember, the ID, this get ID that we have right here, this is a string. We need to convert this into an object ID object. And we can do this by saying new Mongo ID. And then we'll just have that get parameter being passed into this Mongo ID function. So this is going to return a new Mongo ID object. So once this person is found here, we want to populate this form with the right values. So ID here, we want to give it echo. We're going to echo person, and in square brackets here, it's going to be underscore ID. Then for the name here, we're going to set its value equal to person square brackets name. And then finally for the job here, we're going to set this equal to PHP echo person job. And I think that should just about do it for loading the page. So if we come back here and on John Doe here, if I click update, we're having a bit of a problem. It looks like I forgot a closing quote, one right here and one right here. If I close those, okay, now if I refresh this, so now you can see we're getting our update form and our fields here are pre-populated with the current values for this document. However, clicking update won't do anything yet because we haven't filled in this portion of our script right here. So what happens if we are doing a post? Well, then we want to do an update. So here we're going to say people, and we're going to call the update method. And as you know, we need to pass this two parameters. First is going to be an associative array that tells us what document we want to update. And second is an array that tells us what to update it with. So the way we're going to find it is by saying where the underscore ID field is going to be equal to a new Mongo ID instance. And we are going to pass it the underscore post for ID. And that will help it find that document. So then we need to update it. We're not going to update by modification since we only have two fields here. We can keep it really simple just by updating by replacement. So we're going to set the name equal to post square brackets name, and we're going to set job equal to underscore post square brackets job. So there you go. That should be everything we need to do to update. But now at this point, we want to redirect back to the main index.php page. So we can do this right at the last thing we want to do inside of this else if statement is we just want to set a header where the location is set to /. And this is just a quick and dirty way of redirecting us back to the home page. So now if we come back here, let me go ahead and refresh this page. So now let's change John Doe here from being just a developer to a web developer. I'll go ahead and click update. And you'll notice nothing happens. The reason nothing happens is because we are posting right back to this URL, which includes the get parameter. And so this portion of our code here is getting executed instead of the post portion. The way we can fix this is just by adding an action, and we just want to set the action to update.php. So now if we come back and refresh the form, I'll change his job to being a web developer. Now if I click update, you can see that it was updated. We were sent back to index.php, and this has been changed to web developer instead of just developer. Let's change Jane here. We'll click update, and instead of designer, we'll call her a copywriter. Click update. We come back, and it has been updated. Excellent. So there's only one more thing to do in our little application here, and that is get the delete working. So let's go ahead and close our update page, and I will open delete.php. We'll start this off, as you might expect, by including the mongo.php file. And now delete here is actually very simple. We can say if it is set that we have an underscore get with an ID, and we're doing this exactly the same way we do with update. If we come back here to Chrome, you can see when I hover over delete, we have that same object ID down here in the URL. So if that has been set, then we need to go ahead and find it and remove it. So we can say people. Remember, we get this people variable from this mongo.php file up here. We want to call remove. And again, we're going to pass it an associative array. And in this associative array, we want to find where the underscore ID is equal to the new Mongo ID value of get ID. Excellent. So then down at the bottom, we'll just do, once again, do a header with a location set to / so that it redirects us back to our index.php file. And now if I refresh this And on Bob White here, I'll click delete. We come right back. And as you can see, now we only have 2. I'll delete the last one there. Let me go ahead and walk through it completely with one more new person. We can call this person Kate Wills. Her job can be CEO. I'll click add. She shows up. I can update this from CEO to CTO, for example. Update. That has been updated. And we can delete. And she's gone. So there we have a really quick look at the PHP driver for MongoDB. We've looked at all 4 CRUD operations. We've created new documents. We've read the documents and put them out in a list. And we've been able to update them and delete them as well. Now you'll have access to the code that I wrote in this screencast and the virtual machine as well. You can find those in the links underneath this video. As you can see, the PHP driver was really pretty similar to the JavaScript shell, which makes it really, really easy to use. So that's it for this video, and if you want more documentation about the PHP driver, I'll have a couple of links to that too in the notes underneath this video.